So welcome everyone. In today's video, I'll be making this New York City style miter plane. All right, so I'm going to start with the lever cap, and I'm experimenting with having some of the components cut for me using a laser, and that's what I've done here with this lever cap. So it cut the rough profile, that little heart shape, and then I went through and have drilled out that hole, but that lasering leaves some ridges here and there, so we're going to go ahead and get all of those cleaned up on the belt grinder, and then I'm going to start shaping the rest of that lever cap. So while the shaping of this lever cap is happening, let me use this opportunity to give some background on this style of hand plane. So you might be familiar with the miter planes that were coming out of the United Kingdom that had the dovetail construction. So in New York, they had the piano and organ industry was in need of miter planes, and to cut costs, there were some manufacturers in the city that decided to start making their own instead of importing them. And one of the things they did was they began casting the bodies. And in order to achieve the very narrow mouth that miter planes are known for, while also keeping cost lower, they started adding a movable front plate to make it easy to manufacture, essentially, while also being able to set the mouth very fine. That's the jumping off point for this plane. I won't be casting in this video just because I don't have that capability, so I'll be using a little bit different construction. And also some other things about this plane. This is not a shooting plane. You can certainly use it for that. Miter planes were never really intended to be shooting planes. The cutting geometry is all wrong for that. These are smoothers, essentially, because they, the very fine mouth, and then bed angles of around 20 degrees. They are bevel up planes, but they're not low angle planes. So when you take a 20-degree bed angle and combine it with whatever the blade angle is, you have, if it's 25, you're looking at a 25-degree bed angle, or 25-degree blade angle plus a 20-degree bed angle. You're looking at a minimum of 45 degrees, so you're right at standard pitch. If you sharpen any higher, then you're obviously going higher and higher. And these were intended for smoothing operations, difficult woods, gnarly grains, even some metals, ivory, bone. As far back as Roubaud, like with the workbench. Actually, before these planes predate Roubaud, and they all kind of share the same type of construction geometry. Bevel up, but high cutting angles, and basically used in places that would have otherwise destroyed the soles of wooden hand planes. And so after some file work and some a little more belt grinding, and I used a Dremel with a carbide burr to rough out, we are getting this in some pretty good shape. And right now, this is not for anything structural or performance-wise. It's just taking this opportunity to add some decoration to the lever cap. And so with some hand sanding, those are all kind of blended out. That's looking nice. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the rear sole here. And this is stainless steel. I'm working with 303 stainless steel. So it is a machinable stainless steel. It actually machines fairly well. Like with stainlesses, it could work harden if you're not careful. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on the bed. I'm going to cut most of that away using the bandsaw. It just means that there is less to mill out and file away. Bandsaw is much quicker for this. And then now I have a little block at 23 degrees. That's what my bed angle is going to be. And I am set up over in the mini mill. And we're just going to start taking it down until that is fully cleaned up. There's no real, I'm not trying to hit any specific depth right now. Just I want that, all of the bandsaw marks to go away. And that's what we're doing here. All right, so now it's time for some file work. I have a piece of Purple Heart. It's also cut to that 23-degree angle. The bed on the plane after the mill, it was just slightly off. I need to come back in and do some setup work on that mill. So we're just going to go ahead and hand file it now using that that piece of Purple Heart as kind of a file guide. Keep that angle. Once I have the filing all done, everything is nice and even. Taking it over to the disc grinder, and I'm just blending out those scratches. I'm not trying to take any material off. I'm really just trying to blend out the file marks and the milling marks. And now I have that, the rest of that sole now is set up over at the drill press, and I'm going to start drilling for screw holes. And this is how I'm going to attach the sides to the sole. And so after I've gone ahead and tapped one screw, and now I'm applying some super glue, and this is just going to be a temporary clamp essentially. I have my sides, they're also stainless steel, and this is another one of those experimenting with having parts laser cut for me. I went ahead and had those laser cut for me. And I'm using that side so I can get all of my screw holes placed wherever they need to be. And then I can drill those to depth and then go ahead and tap everything. And so after tapping, I can go ahead and deburr those holes, and now I am putting all the countersinks in for those screw heads. And this is the first of many test assemblies. I'm going to do one assembly now, make sure that all these screws are going to work. They're all in the right spot. And then once I have that down, I can move on to the next steps. So now it is time to start on the front sole, and I'm going to rough out. This is the piece that's going to hold the sole to the infill, essentially. You'll see more of that later, and I'm going to go ahead and cut those out. And the way that all this will get attached is with a screw. So it'll have screws into the plate that will ride the wood and act as the bottom of the plane. And then see me testing for the screws there. And then down the center will be another screw hole, and that's what's going to connect to the infill at a later step. And for this project, I'm actually making two planes at the same time. And so when it came to this component, it was much easier to make them both in one kind of go, separate them off with a bandsaw, and then finish up each piece individually. And kind of like with everything else on this plane, they get drilled and then tapped. And you can see that is the front sole, and I'm using that piece that we just made as a guide for my center punches, and then I can come back in and drill and tap the front plate as well. And with that fitting, now it's time to start on a little brass washer. And this will basically go to help distribute the load of the screw head on the top of that infill and hopefully keep from making any kind of divots in the wood. So I've set up in the lathe, I've got a piece of brass stock, and I've gone ahead and drilled it, and I'm going to slice a piece off. A little bit of deburring on that back edge before I cut all the way through. And now I'm going to glue it back on using that cutoff as a mandrel. And this is going to let me kind of round over, shape everything exactly how I wanted to. I wanted to make sure that the one side got perfectly flat, which is what I was doing in the previous step, and now I am giving this a slight round over and a bit of a polish. And then a little bit of fire to separate the glue. And I'll let that cool, and it'll be off to the next step. All right, so let's do a quick check-in. Here's what I have so far. The rear sole, front sole are all ready to go. Same with the screws, the lever caps, and the washers. I still have the thumb screws to do and the infills. So let's go ahead and get started on the rear infill, though this will be Purple Heart, if for no other reason that it was nice and hard, and I kind of liked the interplay between having a Purple Heart infill and then a heart as the main feature of the lever cap. And so I went ahead and got one edge and one face flat with the hand plane, and then now I'm going to go ahead and get it cut to size using the table saw. And I'm going to cut it over size in length, and I'll trim that off later. And then from here we should back to the bandsaw to kind of rough cut my angle, which is that 23 degrees. And then after it's all bandsawed out, I'm going to take it over to the mill, put it back on that setup block that I had earlier, get all that nice and cut down, and then I'll probably do a little more. I noticed things weren't quite perfectly square, so I definitely need to get my mill retrimmed. But after this step, I will go back to the hand plane and just kind of true up one side and get everything kind of like perfectly square. So now it's time for some assembly work. I have some denatured alcohol. I'm just going to get everything nice and clean. And then using the red thread locker, I'm going to go ahead and get all of those screws locked into place. And those shouldn't ever come loose unless you heat them up with a torch. And so now I need to heat things up with a torch. I realized that this front plate should have been wider, and I messed up early in the process. I messed up in my drawings originally, and it's something I should have known better. So basically how it was, all of the force of keeping that front plate where it should be would have been taken by the infill, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to actually rest on the sides. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm fixing all that out. I can reuse that one piece that I made, and I'm going to cut a notch into the front of that hand plane. It's going to go up to the mouth, and I just the infill is not installed. That's just a scrap piece of wood I had just to kind of keep everything in orientation how it needs to be. And so I removed most of what the bandsaw there, and now I'm going to come in and just clean it back up with the mill. And so I've made a new wider front plate. I was able to reuse the screw mechanism that I had made earlier, and you can kind of see how that's going to work. So now as the screw is inserted through the infill, it will put all the pressure and distribute it to the sides of the hand plane instead of directly on the infill, which is what I wanted. So now it's time for some more assembly work. It's a little difficult to see, but I've gone through and I've drilled out the inside of those screws just slightly to get rid of the place where your Allen wrench would go. Turn those around, and I'm gonna install some essentially brass rod as like an inlay to help take that out. There would have not been any way for me to realistically grind through those screw heads to make everything disappear. So coming in now with some more, this is retaining compound. Again, this should be fairly permanent. And then I'm going to start sticking in all of those brass rods. And I don't think this is absolutely necessary, because all this is going to get peened and deformed, and it should fill up and kind of manually lock itself in. But this is more of a kind of like a belt and suspenders type situation. Figured it can't hurt to help hold everything together. And now I'm just going to trim off some of that excess, make it easier to get everything peened. And I have a piece of scrap steel there that's a little less than 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm just using that essentially to keep the spacing that I need for the peening material correct. The back needs to be rounded over. It was fairly square, so that it's back to the bandsaw. Kind of rough all that out, and then grinding away at the belt grinder. And then second verse is the same as the first for the front plate. I'm just going to mimic that same profile that was on the back and just put it on the front now. So now I can just work on the front infill, and it's off to the bandsaw, cut away most of the waste, and then I'm going to start grinding away at it, true it up, a little bit of hand sanding, and then some mill work to kind of get all the features put in. So this is a slot that's needed to help to allow clearance for that screw mechanism that I had made earlier. So this is going to be slightly oversized to that piece, and that's going to allow that to slide back and forth and be able to kind of get the mouth opening that I want. And with that working, it's now time for more assembly. And I can start drilling out all of those holes that will to help lock the infills in. I got some more brass rod. I'm gonna go ahead and stick that in, and then pin it over. That should help hold everything. So now I need to figure out where the hole is needed for that screw that's going to hold the front plate to the rest of the plane. So I've taken a screw, I ground it to a point, and I use that to locate center. And then I put the plane back in the mill, found that center mark, and then I can just come through with an end mill, plunge it down, because it is a center cutting end mill, and then take a few passes and then turn what is a hole into a slot. And while I am here, I'm going to go ahead and kind of true up this front. There was just a little bit of misalignment between both sides of the hand plane, which is not a big deal, and so I can go ahead and just true that up and true that and the infill up all in kind of like one go. So I know those are all fairly square across there, and it just looks a little bit better that way. So here's a nice little sneak preview. You can see how it's coming together. I'm really happy so far. And now it's onto the blade. So the blade is also another part that I was experimenting having laser cut for me. And there's a few ridges here and there, and then a couple tabs. So I need to have all of that gone and get all this cleaned up and get ready to harden everything. Now, one thing that I kind of found out the hard way was that having these cut on the laser, there was a little bit of surface hardening around those holes. So when I went to kind of clear them out, I was having problems with it. So over to a torch, heat it up, let it cool down slowly. That anneals whatever was hardened, so I can then drill through and countersink for some screws that are going to go there later. Now it is time to harden these blades, and so I'm just working on a backdoor, little kind of makeshift fire brick forge here. Outside in December in 60-degree weather, which is unseasonably warm, but I'm going to use it to my advantage. And this is a simple steel, so I can do the kind of get it red hot, non-magnetic, and then dunk it in oil, and then temper it for a few hours to bring it back. I am shooting for a hardness of around 58, 60 Rockwell, something like that. And after that has gone through a couple tempering cycles, I'm going to go ahead and clean off all the schmutz and scale and whatever else from the hardening process, and then start flattening it. So after the belt grinder, I'm over on the disc grinder, and I'm just trying to get most of that fairly flat, at least where it's going to sit on the plane, and I will really flatten the cutting area later. After that is done, I've taken it over to the belt grinder with, I got a Scotch-Brite belt on there, and I'm basically just trying to blend out all those surfaces. And then my name stamp, the top of that up there is not hard. It didn't need to be. And you can see where it's been blended out, and then what is, I guess, extra flat. One of the features, I guess, with this style of hand plane is there is a piece of wood attached to the blade and kind of acts as a handle. And so I have some more of that Purple Heart, and I am shaping that little part now. And one thing that I wanted to do, I decided to do this kind of late, is I wanted to mill just a teeny tiny little pocket where that piece of wood's going to sit. And for nothing else, it was just going to help me keep that piece of wood straight as it went across there. I just wanted it to be straight. So that's what I've done there. And then now it's time to attach it. Just be careful with the depth of screwing those in. I got it secured down with there's a teeny bit of epoxy at the moment just to make sure it's not going to go anywhere on me. And then I can insert some teeny tiny screws and lock that piece of wood in. All right, now that I have all of the wood on that blade to shape, I went ahead and flattened, last inch or so of the blade, and I'm getting it nice and sharp now. I'm gonna go take it to the strop, remove the burr, and then I can test the sharpness. And I like to do that on some end grain of a block of wood, and this is cutting real nice, so I think the blade is nice and ready. And now I'm using preparing a chisel. This is a technique I learned from a Bill Carter video. It's called the blunt chisel. And essentially you've taken a chisel, turned it into a scraper. And to do this, I went and bought the cheapest chisel that I could find at the local big box store. And just using that to refine that rear infill. And now I'm in with some files to further refinement and just kind of get everything like nice and in line. Then some sandpaper, kind of blend out all the scratches, clean everything up, and then the same thing on the inside, get that nice and clean too. And then it's over to the Scotch-Brite belt, and I can just blend out all the scratches and make the hand plane look pretty. And so now it's time to finally finish the lever cap. So it was, the part we started with, and this is the part we're going to end with. I wanted to wait until drilling out for these screw holes until the very end, because then I could use the infill in the blade to make sure that I had the positioning just right for these. So those get drilled and tapped, and luckily I was able to do it without busting through into that heart area, which I'm real happy with. And now I need to turn my attention to the thumb screw. It needs to be shortened up. I built a little jig for that. You'll see here in a second that I can kind of slowly round over the section that I cut away. And then I'm going to stick it back into the lathe, and I'm going to change the profile of that screw head. I'm going to round it over, and then finally get it all cleaned up and looking nice. And for the surface finish, I stopped with some Scotch-Brite. It leaves more of a satiny look, and that's what I was going for, because glossy, shiny will show fingerprints. That's what I'm trying to avoid. So now I'm over on, this is a piece of granite and a bunch of sandpaper, and I'm just going to slowly work at this until I get that sole nice and flat. All right, so now it's time for some finishing. There's still some file marks that are on the insides of those hearts that I wasn't real happy with, and I wasn't, it was just taking a long time to try to get them all blended out. So come in with some spray paint. That helps fill up all those gaps, hides all those file marks, so it looks nice. But I didn't want to spray paint everything. So now I'm chemical blackening the surface, and it just, I think, has a better look. It's more of a kind of a transparent look. I like it a lot better than using paint. And then, so this is some oil, and we're just going to oil up all the infills. And I don't know if I mentioned it before. So the body is stainless steel. It doesn't really need any surface treatments, but the lever cap is mild steel. So cold bluing, and then that got oiled as well, will help keep that from tarnishing. And now it's time for assembly. Let's kind of see how all this is going to go together. There's that slot that we milled earlier, gets held in with that screw, and then all the load gets distributed to the sides instead of the infill. And now I can go ahead and install the lever cap. And then the thumb screw, and then finally the blade. So it is cutting beautifully. This is some spalted birch that I had, and it's a little hard to tell on camera, but it left the surface kind of shiny, which was real nice. And then this is a gnarly piece of walnut that I have, and slicing through no problem. And so I'm real happy with the way this turned out. I made two. Figured that was going to be the easiest way to make sure that at least one of them turned out well. So at any rate, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to see more of my work, I've left a link to my website, or you can also check out more of the videos. So again, thank you so much for following along, and I'll catch you on the next one.